This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Boris Johnson wins the race to become Britain's next Prime Minister, heading straight into a confrontation over Brexit and a diplomatic standoff with Iran. South African public protector's future hangs in the balance after Constitutional Court overrules graft probe on Ramaphosa. And China sends professionals to help South Sudan prepare for any eventuality of an Ebola outbreak. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marsall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Uche Okoronko with the day's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Africa's youngest nation, South Sudan, gets its first mobile money service. And South Africa's power utilities bailout plan widens the government's budget deficit. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And let's begin in the United Kingdom, where Boris Johnson has won the race to become Britain's next Prime Minister, heading straight into a confrontation over Brexit with Brussels and Parliament, as well as a tense diplomatic standoff with Iran. The former London mayor easily beat his rival Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt in a poll conducted among members of the governing Conservative Party. He is expected to be confirmed as Prime Minister on Wednesday, when his predecessor Theresa May formally tenders her resignation to Queen Elizabeth II. US President Donald Trump was the first world leader to offer his congratulations. Well, Jamie Owen tells us more about the man himself, the UK's next Prime Minister.
Morning. It's taken a long time for Boris Johnson to get into 10 Downing Street. Getting to the top of British politics is no mean feat. If Boris Johnson has cultivated anything, it's a reputation for clowning and buffoonery. But his charisma and his way with words appeals to many voters.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you.
Boris has won because everyone is sick and tired of career politicians, beige people who took us into that terrible financial crisis. Now we've got someone, we know who they are, they call a spade, and that's the kind of person we want leading us.
Childhood friends recall his appearance at school drama performances where, having failed to learn his part, he'd run across the stage from pillar to pillar where he'd stuck the script. Getting a laugh by not preparing is one of the criticisms levelled against him by critics here at Westminster.
Boris Johnson started his career as a journalist and was fired from his first job for making up a quote. He reported on the European Union from Brussels and was caught exaggerating and in some cases simply inventing stories. After moving into politics, Boris Johnson became London mayor by winning over voters who didn't ordinarily vote for the Conservatives. His tenure as mayor saw the city host the Olympics and the introduction of its popular bicycle hire scheme, though both had been signed off before he took office. Git O'Harry was at Oxford University with Mr. Johnson and worked for him when he was mayor.
He is hugely intelligent, enormously charismatic, quite offbeat. He breaks the rules, he does the kind of things that people don't expect politicians, or certainly didn't in the old days, to do. He speaks what's on his mind.
Johnson's first chance to become Prime Minister came and went after the Brexit referendum. He was pronounced unfit for office by a political friend turned competitor. Former Prime Minister Theresa May then appointed Boris Johnson as Foreign Secretary. Critics say his inattention to detail in that job compounded the detention of a British woman imprisoned in Iran, where she remains. The episode didn't win him friends in the Foreign Office.
Would you like to see him as Prime Minister?
He would not be my first choice, no.
Second choice?
He may not even be in the top two.
Next stop, Downing Street, Boris.
Boris Johnson has become Britain's Prime Minister by campaigning as the outsider. Yet he is the ultimate insider, a millionaire who went to the elite school Eton as well as Oxford University.
Mr. Johnson's first job as leader will be to take his country out of the EU. Failure to deliver Brexit could add his name to the long list of Conservative leaders who've been brought down by party divisions over Europe. A new Prime Minister doesn't mean the old problems will disappear. Jamie Owen, CGTN, Westminster.
Well, let's cross over now to Jamie Owen in London for more on this developing story. Jamie, how is London reacting to this choice of Boris Johnson as the next Prime Minister?
Well, the honest answer is the UK is absolutely sweltering in a heat wave. And I think if we walked away from here and talked to most Londoners and most Brits tonight, they're probably finishing work and having a well-earned beer, enjoying the unseasonal British sunshine in the middle of summer. The British political classes, on the other hand, are of course divided right down the middle. Boris Johnson supporters are absolutely ecstatic that after all of this time their man has won. And you can probably hear behind me those people who oppose Boris Johnson's political stance, namely the Remainers, really are most unhappy tonight. This remains, when it comes to Brexit and Boris Johnson, a pretty divided country. Let me just show you the front page of London's evening newspaper. This is the Standard, and that pretty much says it all. It says, Boris, it's time to get down to work. And I think there is a sort of general weariness in the UK. This has gone on for so long. Ordinary people outside politics and journalism are just sick to death of this, and they just want their politicians to get on with it, whatever that means and whatever that looks like.
So the public pretty much wants the politicians to get on with it, or life to get on. But walk us through the next steps, though, after today as regards the succession of Theresa May.
Yeah, let me talk you through this. So it's an interesting 24 hours. Tomorrow, Theresa May, who still is Prime Minister, by the way, will hold her last Prime Minister's questions in this building over the road here. Her last appearance as the UK's PM. She will then probably make a short speech in Downing Street, her last, in front of that famous black door. And then she will be driven in the official limousine to see the Queen and tender her resignation. After that takes place, the trappings of power fall away very quickly. Theresa May is then driven out of Buckingham Palace in an ordinary private car. The limousine disappears because it's gone back to collect Boris Johnson, who then follows in her footsteps and is taken to Buckingham Palace, taken to meet the Queen. The phrase is the kissing of hands. In our rather peculiar unwritten constitution, this is what happens tomorrow. It is the Queen who essentially formally appoints the Prime Minister, and Boris Johnson becomes PM tomorrow. We then expect him to speak on the steps of Downing Street and at least in short form outline his vision of what he expects over the coming weeks and months.
So, Jamie, the biggest issue for the last two Prime Ministers in the UK has been Brexit. What do we know about Boris Johnson's stand on this, and how might he handle it, do you think?
You know, it's a very good question, and the straight answer is yes, we have a new Prime Minister, there's a new face in Downing Street, but the brutal truth is that we are stuck with the same old problems. Principally this country voted 3 years ago to leave the EU. However, this place behind us is essentially a remaining House of Commons and has voted categorically that it will not leave the EU on a no-deal basis. Now, Boris Johnson has said that he will consider a no-deal if it comes to that on the 31st of October. So quite simply, Boris Johnson has the same issues that absolutely foxed Theresa May during her time as Prime Minister. A famous American president once said the first rule of power is doing your sums. And the truth of the matter is, the sums here are not in Boris Johnson's favour. He does not have a large majority to push his plans through the House of Commons. So frankly, your guess is as good as mine when he comes to deal with a European Union whose position is pretty concrete. They have said, look, there's no negotiation on this. The deal is the deal is the deal. So we will wait and see. Boris Johnson's great USP is his magic dust, and his fans will tell you his ability to walk into a room and change the chemistry and the mood of a room. Well, he will need all of that if he's to get through these almost seemingly impossible political circumstances over the coming weeks and months.
All right, Jamie Owen joining us there from London. Thank you. Now, kidnapping of foreigners and high-profile Nigerians is common in Nigeria. The incidents have, however, risen sharply this year. So far, 14 people have been kidnapped in less than a week in the country. Most of them are citizens from Turkey and some Chinese. 4 Turkish nationals were abducted by gunmen at a bar in Kwara State on Saturday night, while 2 Chinese workers were kidnapped earlier this month and 5 others were kidnapped in April. No group has said it carried out the abductions. Let's now speak to Roy Okidiebi in Lagos. He's a retired military officer and a security consultant. Roy, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. Can you lay out for us what the government is dealing with here? Are these kidnappings taking any patterns?
Well, thank you for the opportunity once again. Kidnapping in Nigeria has been allowed to become one of the business ventures that is thriving. You know, it became difficult to conduct armed robbery attacks, and gradually the banks and the financial institutions got sealed up, and gradually opportunities to get raids on people with cash. People began to move with less cash and went on online banking and all that. So opportunities to raise monies from armed robbery depleted, and kidnapping became one of the bane of the transaction to get exchange for people for cash. But in Nigeria particularly, we have the opportunities to curb this menace in the populated space, where the policing and the agencies, sister agencies, have put down structures to be able to do that. But in the unpopulated space, on the highways and the expressways and the forest and the creeks, the marines, those are the places that are bringing the greatest challenge right now.
So there are measures that the government has put in place to tackle this menace of kidnappings. But when you look at the end results of these kidnappings, is the government winning the war?
Well, it's a big challenge. It's a big challenge right now because one of the opportunities for government to have a stronger hold on the war is the criminal justice system, where you will be sure that persons that have been arrested connected to this kind of criminality are going to face the long arm of the law, and they are going to be dealt with by the law. Then the other opportunity of the government to handle this menace is the porous forest areas and the expressways, the highways. And these are places that are populated by a lot of bandits that have not been coordinated into the population agenda of the country, and we don't even know who their identities are right now. So this is another big challenge for the government to be able to run forest and rangers to handle those areas. And the opportunity of data management. So we don't have enough data management synchronization to put together all the data that we collate on persons. So these are major challenges for the government, and the war is far from being won.
All right, Roy Okidiebi joining us there from Lagos. Now, South Africa's public protector, or the corruption watchdog, Busisiwe Mkhebane's future seems to be on the line and her credibility at stake. This is after the Constitutional Court ruled she acted in bad faith when investigating an apartheid-era bank bailout. Mkhebane had also accused President Cyril Ramaphosa of serious misconduct and proposed that he be referred to Parliament for violating an executive ethics code, a charge that Ramaphosa has dismissed and is seeking legal recourse against. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The embattled public protector Busisiwe Mkhebane is under fire from all angles. The main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, has already asked Parliament to initiate proceedings for her removal. On Monday, the Constitutional Court found that Mkhebane had acted in bad faith when investigating an apartheid-era bank bailout. The court asserted that her investigation was flawed and that she was not honest during her investigation, and ordered her to pay 15% of the legal costs.
The finding yesterday against the public protector that she had acted in bad faith and had acted dishonestly really is damning for her, because there's no way in which she can have that set aside, and that finding will be recorded in our annuals going forward. She has come under a large amount of scrutiny since she took the position of public protector, and just once again, she received a lot of criticism in her finding in this ABSA investigation. There was evidence that suggested that she deliberately ignored certain evidence, that she deliberately left out crucial elements of the investigation, and that she acted in bad faith.
This is the second high-profile report by the public protector that has been set aside by the courts. A number of other reports by Mkhwebane are currently under review in the courts. Among the more notable legal battles are her ongoing feuds with Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan and President Cyril Ramaphosa. The scathing judgment by the Constitutional Court against the public protector has sparked renewed calls from political parties and other civil society organizations for her to be struck off the advocate's role. There are also calls by the Legal Practice Council to institute disciplinary action against her.
In order for a person to be registered as an advocate in South Africa, they must be seen to be a fit and proper person. Now, the court yesterday found that she had lied under oath. So in other words, she'd been dishonest in court papers. There is a strong argument to then suggest that she's not fit and proper to be an advocate.
At least one political analyst says the public protector might lose credibility as she's now seen as meddling in politics.
It's a very difficult situation for the public protector to be found to be in a position where whatever she's doing is projecting a sense of being party to a faction, a discredited faction of the ANC, and so her work is read with a political lens. I think because the Constitutional Court, which is the Supreme Court of the land, has passed this verdict, right? She comes out as a tainted public official.
The public protector in South Africa is one of 6 independent state institutions set up by the country's constitution to support and defend democracy. Wityh for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
China says it will support South Sudan in its preparation for a possible Ebola outbreak. Beijing says a team of experts with experience in handling Ebola cases in West Africa is expected in South Sudan next month to help the country's health ministry. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports from the capital, Juba.
China's ambassador to South Sudan touring an Ebola center in Juba. He says Beijing will play a role in South Sudan's efforts to prepare in case of an Ebola outbreak in the country.
We always put the medical care service as a priority for China-South Sudan cooperation.
The World Health Organization, the International Medical Corps, and South Sudan's Health Ministry have put together an Ebola treatment center in Juba. China says its team that worked on the Ebola outbreak in West Africa will travel to South Sudan in August.
They will continue with the discussion with the members of National Ebola Task Force to see where are the gaps and how China can intervene.
Ebola cases are now confirmed in Aliwara in Democratic Republic of Congo, 70 kilometers from South Sudan's border.
Many South Sudanese people cross the border to DRC for trade, social reasons and medical services. So Juba is on high alert for an Ebola outbreak. China says it will help South Sudan be as ready as possible. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Somalia debates electoral model for the upcoming polls amid concerns over vicious clan politics. And 1.6 million people facing food insecurity in Mozambique.
Africa, the most iconic wildlife destination in the world. Its unique ecosystems were formed over countless eons. Many people can only dream of visiting this natural paradise. But now, for the first time ever, CGTN Wild Wonderland live show is bringing Africa to you through all of our online platforms. 14 episodes from July 22nd to 28th take you to adventure through the Great Plains of Kenya's Masai Mara, the Serengeti in Tanzania, and the Greater Kruger Park in South Africa. Welcome aboard the wildest ride of a lifetime. This is Wild Wonderland live show, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's now head over to the Horn of Africa nation, and Somalia is debating over an electoral model for the upcoming elections. Al-Shabaab remains the main obstacle for now, but clan politics have also been identified as a major setback to the realization of democracy in Somalia. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo reports from Mogadishu.
This 15-member committee has been tasked by Parliament to prepare a draft electoral law ahead of general elections due to take place by the end of next year. The appointment comes as debate over the electoral model for the upcoming elections gains momentum in the country. Authorities and electoral stakeholders say that they are working towards universal suffrage, as it hopes to mark a major shift from the clan-based politics that has governed the country's political life since the onset of the transitional government for close to 2 decades.
We hope
that President Farmajo's administration will eradicate the clan-based power-sharing formula known as 4.5. We hope party politics will take center stage, even though it's still a new thing. The current parliament wants clan politics to remain in place so that they retain their seats, but this is not progress.
The country has begun registering political parties for the first time since it fell into military dictatorship in late 1960s, with the country hoping to conduct its first ever multi-party elections next year. However, electoral officials here in the country argue that without adequate security, a popular vote will not be achieved.
It is very important because without security you cannot do election. We are doing now the verification of the voter registration centers. And we want that our security sectors sit together and see where it's safe, where it's not safe. They have to direct us where NIC will go, and without that, the election cannot happen.
In the last election cycle, authorities failed to reach a consensus on an electoral model, prompting the creation of an electoral college of 14,000 delegates, formed by a council of elders comprising of 135 delegates.
The Somali public wants to elect candidates based on party affiliation. This will in turn usher a return of democracy to the country, as it's common in many developed nations of the world.
The public will have little say in the formation of the next government. Instead, it's parliamentarians who will choose the next president in a secret ballot. And with less than 2 years into his first term, it's unclear whether the incumbent president Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo will seek re-election. Meanwhile, experts want an end to clan politics so as to allow for fair competition in future elections. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
To Mozambique now, where at least 1.6 million people in the country are at risk of food insecurity until September this year. According to a recent integrated food security phase classification, more than 67,000 children are also in dire need of nutritional support, with 90% of them acutely malnourished. CGTN's Daniela Pearson reports.
Cyclone Idai was one of the worst tropical storms to affect southern Africa. It caused catastrophic damage in Mozambique just weeks ahead of the main harvest in April and May. The country now faces a looming food shortage, with the situation expected to further deteriorate until February next year. 34-year-old Minda Guisado is one of the victims of this devastating cyclone.
Suddenly, the roof was gone and the house felt like it was in the sea. There were waves inside the house.
Cyclone Idai washed away an estimated 400,000 hectares of crops. While the World Food Programme plans to provide food assistance to those affected, local authorities have called out culprits to stop activities that worsen such extreme climate conditions.
They must change their habit
They must understand that what is happening that side is also affecting we here, innocent people. And now we are applying from them resources to rebuild ourselves. And those resources are not taking place yet. So they must understand that from what bad they're doing that side, they're killing people other side.
We are helping them clear land and pay them with food. We are helping them doing small irrigation canals. We are helping them to basically have plant nurseries, do some programs in terms of forestation. These are the things which will develop long-term resilience in the areas where people are settling down.
Mozambique has been affected by several consecutive natural disasters in 2019, which has been affecting food security in the country. The WFP is currently transitioning from its emergency phase to an early recovery phase, expected to last until March 2020. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, Chinese 22nd Peacekeeping Engineers Detachment Unit and the Nepalese Peacekeeping Infantry have conducted a joint defense drill in the country's Walungu area. During the drill, the Chinese and the Nepalese peacekeepers conducted joint exercises with Chinese peacekeepers launching the emergency plan. Every vehicle operator cooperated at the first time, with Nepalese peacekeepers getting the weapons to occupy favorable terrain to battle the militants. The drill seeks to improve the peacekeepers' ability to deal with emergencies. Botswana has pledged its support for Kenya's bid for a non-permanent seat in the UN Security Council. The announcement was made today by President Eric Masisi at the start of a two-day state visit to Kenya after holding bilateral talks with President Uhuru Kenyatta at State House in Nairobi. CGTN's Robert Nagila reports.
This was the first meeting between the two leaders since President Eric Masisi came to power in 2018. Masisi was accorded full state honors, including a gun salute. The two leaders appear to have hit it off immediately, their meeting taking longer than expected. At the core of their discussions was the strengthening of bilateral ties between Kenya and Botswana.
President of the Republic of Kenya.
That was evident when the two leaders emerged from their talks to announce support for Kenya's bid for a non-permanent seat at the UN Security Council.
They didn't need to ask for their opportunity to be voted into the Security Council of the United Nations on a non-permanent basis. Botswana will vote before Kenya votes itself in.
The two leaders presided over the fifth session of the Joint Permanent Commission on Cooperation, in which several agreements in trade and security were signed by their delegations.
My administration is keen to broaden our areas of cooperation to include the minerals, mining sector, livestock breeding, trade, tourism promotion, agribusiness, as well as manufacturing.
Also discussed was the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which came into force recently, and the Africa Union Agenda 2063. Later on Tuesday, the two leaders held a roundtable meeting with business leaders from both countries to explore opportunities in both countries. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Well, let's now go to Uche Okronko for the latest business news. Uche.
Thanks, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Africa's youngest nation, South Sudan, gets its first mobile money service. And South Africa's power utilities bailout plan widens the government's budget deficit.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, Let's start off in South Africa. The country's 2019 and 2020 tax revenues could be significantly lower than budgeted for, and the country may need to borrow more than planned. Now, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has also revealed that the cost of supporting troubled power utility firm Eskom was a contributing factor. Mboweni made the revelations while tabling a special appropriation bill that will avail over $4.24 billion to Eskom. The utility has more than $28.7 billion of debt and is struggling to supply power to households and businesses in the country. Now, Mboweni said the lower tax receipts and additional costs related to Eskom could substantially increase the government's borrowing requirements for 2019 and 2020. Meanwhile, Finance Minister and the PS were freed on cash bails following graft charges. Kenya's Finance Minister Henry Rotich and his principal secretary have now been freed on a cash bail of about $145,000 each after being arraigned at law courts over various corruption offences. Rotich and 27 other officials are accused of financial misconduct and conspiracy to defraud taxpayers in a multi-million-dollar dam project. Here's CGTN's Alexandria Majala explaining.
Kenya's Director of Public Prosecutions, Nuruddin Haji, says he has approved economic crimes charges against Treasury Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich, as well as his Deputy Principal Secretary Kamau Tuge.
This decision has been made professionally, independently, devoid of any external influence, political consideration, or any other extraneous matters. Consequently, I have today directed the DCI to effect the arrest and immediate arraignment before court of the accused persons named below herein.
The two have appeared before court on Tuesday to face graft charges. Rotich and Tuge are being charged over a $446 million contract awarded to CMC Di Ravenna. The Italian company was allegedly paid for the construction of the Kimwara and Aro Dams project in Elgeyo Marakwet County. Both projects haven't been started.
In view of the international nature of these crimes, we realize that we cannot fight corruption on our own, and as a strategy to fighting economic crimes, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution has prioritized the tracing of proceeds of crime, benefits and instruments of crime, asset confiscation, and forfeiture.
Rotich's arrest is an unprecedented detention of a sitting Minister for Corruption in a country notorious for graft.
It's an important step forward. It could be a defining moment, but I would say that it is still too early to say that this is the moment we've been waiting for. Of course, opening charges against the person who has been in charge of public finance policy in this country is a significant step. But I think more importantly is not to open charges, but to basically ensure we get convictions and also that the assets are recovered.
Both Rotich and CMC deny any wrongdoing. The DPP has asked the minister and other accused officials to resign immediately. The two dams were budgeted to cost $446 million, but Treasury under Rotich borrowed $630 million instead, needlessly rushing up Kenya's ballooning public debt, which stands at around 55% of the GDP. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, banking and asset management group Investec has introduced a new leave policy as well as a new dress code for its South African employees. The latest flexible system will enable employees there to choose when and how they take leave, ensuring they deliver on key performance indicators. CGTN's Julie Shire has the details.
Financial institutions are known for strict employee guidelines, but global assets manager Investec is changing the norm. It's the first South African company to introduce a flexible leave system.
We don't want to pay people for their time only. We want to pay them for their performance. We want to reward performance, but we want people to use their time to deliver in terms of the absolutely exponential requirements that we have inside the environment. So people can take leave, not to a maximum amount of days, to whatever time they need.
The bank has also implemented a new dress code, which doesn't always require suits or formal wear.
If your day entails a client that requires you to don a suit and tie, that's exactly what you'll be wearing. If your day is in front of regulators and that means a certain dress code, so consider what your day is, act like an adult, think about what that means for you and how you need to be and show up in that way.
Investec prides itself on having a dynamic culture and strong sense of trust with its employees. It's now aligning itself with international workplace trends through a flexible leave policy and more relaxed dress code.
I've seen quite a few employers sort of look at going in that direction because of women and their sort of parental responsibilities, and it was about making sure that they didn't lose women. But it's now gone a lot beyond that, and flexible working is generally applied across the board.
But there are challenges. Job flexibility could mean never logging off, and not everyone may be suited to it.
I have had clients that have rolled this out a few years ago, and some unfortunately did have issues with performance, where people just weren't disciplined enough to put in the hours at home, and they just worked better in a team where there was sort of a team motivating them to work. So it does vary.
Investec is hoping a more flexible work ethic will create a healthy work-life balance for its employees, boost productivity, and further enhance innovation. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's head to South Sudan now, where Zain Telecoms and Trinity Technologies have partnered to provide the first mobile money service in the country. The service is dubbed M-Gurush, which stands for mobile money in Arabic. The service is also licensed by the Bank of South Sudan and the National Communications Authority in the country. Now, South Sudan is Africa's youngest nation with a population of roughly 12 million people. It is estimated that only 4 million people own mobile phones. The service is expected to improve the financial inclusion in the country, where unlicensed digital money operators have been running their businesses. Well, let's move on now. On the international front, U.S. President Donald Trump has met with the leaders of several American tech companies to discuss Huawei, the embattled Chinese telecoms equipment maker. The White House said Trump agreed with their request for quicker licensing decisions from the U.S. Commerce Department on the blacklisted company. Now, Huawei is a leader in next-generation 5G wireless technology. It is barred from developing such networks in the United States. Washington has put the company on an entity list, which what it calls national security concerns. As Great Britain awaits the results of who will be elected the next Prime Minister to lead the process of formally exiting the European Union, it's also laying the foundation for a post-Brexit economy. That includes promoting trade relations with several countries, including Australia, and trying to lure companies with incentives. Here's Greg Navarro explaining.
The move to launch a business that compares products for consumers has been a successful one for Finder.com co-founder Fred Shabesta.
You know, from your credit card to your insurance policy, your cell phone plan, you can compare it all there. It's a free service.
The company has grown in Australia and ventured overseas, including into the UK, where Shabesta says he may consider moving his headquarters.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal where your headquarters are, because that's where you're going to pay your corporate taxes.
It's the kind of move the UK is encouraging as it attempts to build a post-Brexit economy. For many tech companies and startups, the range of incentives being offered, including tax breaks, is tough to ignore.
Now, if it's 50% cheaper from one country to the other, that means you can invest more, you can hire more people, and the company can grow faster.
But it's unclear how long those benefits may last.
Short term, yes, you will have that opportunity. See, there's some benefits to go in there. It might be tax incentives. Might be things like property incentives, lower rent or whatever might be the case, but we don't know long term. And that won't be resolved till we know exactly what the United Kingdom is going to end up with.
The UK isn't just focused on tech companies and startups, it's also looking to sign free trade agreements with several countries, including Australia, once it formally leaves the EU. The two countries signed an agreement earlier this year to help smooth the transition for exporters, including Australian wine producers. There's a theory that the UK's exit from the European Union offers no great advantage to Australia's economy. In fact, it could become a source of greater competition.
Well, I actually think that Britain being tied to the European Union has been quite good for Australia, because I think that Britain's been so tied up with red tape in Brussels that they haven't been as competitive as they could be in China and in ASEAN and in Japan and Korea. So Australia's been let off the hook.
Shabesta is convinced the decision to branch out into the UK, despite the uncertainty around Brexit.
The UK's got a very well-established economy. They're very good at marketing into Europe.
Was a smart one. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Meanwhile, Beijing continues to stress that the one country, two systems principle in Hong Kong cannot be challenged. Now, the Chinese Foreign Ministry calls on the United States to stop sending the wrong signals to protesters. Here's CGTN's Chuck Tinte with more.
The one country, two systems principle is the bottom line. The Chinese Foreign Ministry has responded to the violence of recent protests, saying lawbreakers should be brought to justice.
You just mentioned that foreign media has said there is no freedom of speech in Hong Kong, but I want to say the incidents have nothing to do with freedom of speech. The current events are extreme violence, in violation of the basic law, and a challenge to the one country, two systems principle. The central government supports the administration of Hong Kong in punishing those who have broken the law.
Hua accuses the United States of playing a role in the demonstrations. She advises Washington to remove its black hands from the territory and asks the United Kingdom to rethink its recent statements on the Hong Kong people's freedom and rights. Hua says Hong Kong has enjoyed a high degree of freedom and rights since the implementation of the one country, two systems policy.
Violence is not a solution to any problem.
Lam also condemned the clashes among demonstrators in Hong Kong's Yuen Long district. She said violence would only result in more violence, and this would be at the cost of Hong Kong's people, who are suffering from the loss of order. Other officials have expressed their strong oppositions to the protesters storming the central government's liaison office.
It really has made me indignant. I strongly condemn these lawless acts. These acts must be pursued through to the end in accordance with the law. We must find those who are behind these acts and bring them to justice.
The ordinance stipulates that a person who desecrates the national flag or national emblem by publicly and willfully burning, mutilating, scrawling on, defiling, or trampling on it will be sentenced to 3 years in prison.
那的刑罚就是3年的监禁。他们的目标是什么呢？根本就是搞乱，就是个暴力。
What are their objectives? It's simply to cause disorder. It's violence. The number of tourists have dropped sharply over the past month, with total business volume decreasing by 20 to 40%. I also want to ask our SAR government to bring these rioters to justice in accordance with the law as soon as possible, so as to return us to a peaceful and law-based Hong Kong.
The Pearl of the Orient has been suffering from riots since June. Hundreds of protesters stormed Hong Kong's Legislative Council, shattering glass doors and tearing down a metal wall earlier in July. And 20 days later, local police seized what is thought to be the largest ever cache of high-powered explosives uncovered in the city. And a large group of masked men in white t-shirts assaulted protesters and passers-by this Sunday in northwest Hong Kong's Yuen Long Station. The violence began in opposition to Hong Kong's amendment of a fugitive bill. But the region's chief executive, Carrie Lam, announced the bill was dead on July 9th. Chuck Tinte, CGTN.
Well, that's all for now in Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, Boris Johnson is all set to take over as the next Prime Minister in the UK. We review his plans as he navigates the exit from the European Union. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. The first modest fashion show created in honor of Muslim women in Ghana.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Ntah, an anchor for CGTN.
Fashion designers in Ghana are starting to realize there's a big market for Muslim women looking for modest clothing. At the country's first ever modest fashion show, designers showcased the latest trends in headscarves and other fashion items meant for Muslim women. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai reports from Accra.
The stage is set for the first modest fashion show in Ghana. Modeling has always been a passion for these Muslim girls, but they say they were discouraged from chasing their dream due to the stereotype attached to the profession.
My uncle said he's not going to pay my school fees if I want to be a model. But now that he's seen me carving my body and still rocking the runway and going for photo shoots, he loves it. I'm really happy to be a part of this.
Modest fashion is actually beautification. Like, it's really beautiful. It doesn't only show how beautiful you are, but it goes ahead to serve a barrier for you, your dignity, respect, and then all sort of abuses.
Designers here are focused on clothing that conceals rather than accentuate their body shape.
Modest fashion is not mainstream yet in Ghana, but the industry is rising in popularity. The State of the Global Islamic Economy predicts that the market for modest fashion could be worth more than $280 billion by 2020.
With Ghana home to 5 million of Muslims, designers are looking for ways to serve those women who are looking for modest fashion choices.
Modest fashion has a very big market in Ghana, and so because of that, we, the fashion designers, we are enthused to make more of modest outfits for people.
Organizers of the event say they are determined to make society accept modest fashion trends.
We want to curb the stereotype that the modeling is for indecent, and also to give professionally trained models out there to represent hijab and in a modest way.
As modest fashion gradually becomes popular in Ghana, these models and designers hope to pursue it on a global stage. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Liberia FA boss to file a case against FIFA and CAF over Fatma Samura's delegate position.